Actually, I always press the wrong one. Right, good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the Audit Committee for Friday the 21st of November. Do we have any apologies for absence?
Yes, Chair, we've got apologies from the independent member Graham Moore and on the officer side from Jane Pickering.
Thank you. Any declarations of interest? Item 2? No, everybody's content. Minutes of the previous meeting, pages 5 to 10 on your agenda. Are there any issues? I read through them. I didn't think there were that we needed to raise. That doesn't come up in the agenda. So if we can agree the minutes, I'll sign them at the end. Thank you very much. Agreed. And so we move on to the budget for 26-27, which is a reasonable time. Alice, do you want to give us a few introductory words, and then we can start with questions? There's a couple of recommendations in the exact report we might want to think about.
Okay, yes, thank you, Chair.
Over to you, ma'am.
Just before I start, can I introduce George Hampton, who's just started in the finance team, and he's our new finance apprentice. So he's come to see what it's all about. So the budget report is the second in our suite of reports that come through to members. And the main aim of this report is to ask that the revised budget for 25-26 is approved. But alongside that, we ask Audit Committee to consider the 26-27 proposed budget with a view to it being approved in February. The main thing that's changing for us this coming year is the Fair Funding Review and the business rates reset, which is going to change pretty much all of our funding next year. We don't know yet exactly how much we're going to get in terms of funding because it is changing considerably. There was a policy statement that came out yesterday from the government which gave some indication, but it almost makes some of it more complicated. We're not absolutely sure what we're going to get. But week commencing the 15th of December is when we're going to know what our provisional settlement is. So in the meantime, our finance consultants, who are Pixel, have been working quite closely with MHCLG, the government, and they have produced a model and they provided estimates for us, which is what we've been using up until now. Because it's really complex the way the government is proposing giving us our funding. There's so much now that is combined, and there are so many moving parts that there are new burdens funding and grants going in. There's other stuff coming out that's actually going to be quite hard to see what we're gaining and losing, and that's possibly part of the reason for doing it that way. But if I can take you through Appendix B, which is on page 27, which is our 5-year money plan. I'll just try and point out some of the main changes. So the first two columns in that table are our current year budget. So it's original and revised, and it's that revised budget that we're asking members to approve. But next year, that sort of shaded column is where all the changes are happening. And that middle part of the table, which is titled Financed From, is where you're going to see most of the changes. We've always had business rates growth, which we've benefited from for many years. And if it's about halfway down that table, you'll see that in 26-27 that disappears. We've known that for some time. What we didn't know was that we're likely to get some revenue support grant. And Pixel are estimating at the moment, well, before yesterday's policy statement, that we'd get nearly 5 million. Now, that's an educated guess. You know, they're working very closely with the government, but we are not going to know absolutely until just before Christmas. But that's their best guess at the moment, and that's obviously a better position than we originally thought we were going to get. The other grants obviously disappear, like the funding floor grant and New Homes Bonus disappear. So that's the big change for us in terms of funding. Other things to point out are, if you look at net revenue expenditure in the top part of the table, it looks like between 25-26 and 26-27, we've got a massive hike in spend. And obviously there are increases because costs go up, and there are additional calls on budgets from services. But what that hides almost is movements to and from earmarked reserves, and what we're aiming to do next year is to take some funding out of earmarked reserves. We've had some big money come in, such as the extended producer responsibility money and UK SPF. A large part has been put into earmarked reserves this year to come out next year. So in that middle section, in the financed from section towards the bottom, you'll see a contribution to from earmarked reserves. And the figures with brackets round in 25-26 is where we're putting money into earmarked reserves. And you'll notice from 26-27 onwards, they're all positive figures, which means we are taking money from earmarked reserves. So the 17 million that we're showing in net revenue expenditure is partly funded by that transfer from earmarked reserves. Another thing to point out is the deposit investment income, which we'll come to when we talk about treasury management. We are expecting to make nearly 5.5 million this year, which is a really good support to our budget, but we're expecting rates to decrease. So in 26-27, that goes down to about 3.2 million. So obviously you've got less funding there. And the final thing to point out is in that middle section again, the contributions to from general fund balances, that's our surplus deficit line. You'll notice that we've got surpluses shown in 25-26, but from 26-27, we're showing deficits, and we're showing deficits right through to the end of the 5-year money plan. So obviously our funding that we're expecting to come in doesn't quite match the expenditure we're expecting to make, and clearly that's not a sustainable position. Budget scrutiny are looking in detail at our budgets at the moment and all our fees and charges. I think that's it, Chair. If anyone's got any questions.
Off on the budget. Any questions from anybody? Neil.
I suppose just in part of it, the extended producer responsibility amount, I got a little bit confused with that, because at one point it seemed to, page 17, it mentions in paragraph 3.93 that there seems to be a loss in funding, but then obviously it's talking about sort of getting 1.924 million. So I was just a bit confused. I just wonder if you could talk us through what's happening with that money at the moment.
So we've now been given the amounts that we're receiving for next year. We don't necessarily spend it all in the year. So certainly this year, 25-26, when we received it, a large proportion went into earmarked reserves, and then we're pulling that out again next year. Where did it say that we were receiving a loss?
I've written down paragraph 3.39. I'd have to go and find it again, though.
There is no.
3.39, yeah.
Sorry, page 8.
Earmarked reserves, yeah.
This is what you were talking about, yeah, the movement in and out of the earmarked reserve. So we put the money out into the earmarked reserve, and now we're moving it out to spend it. I mean, I have to say, I don't quite understand what responsibilities come with the extended producer responsibility, other than we seem to be expecting an uptick in what we have to deal with. I don't expect you to be able to answer.
It's not my area of expertise, I'm afraid.
Any other points people want to make? Liz?
I should know the answer to this. The 3-year settlement, is that starting the coming year or is it the year after?
So it'd be from 26, 27 onwards for 3 years, yeah.
Right. So we've got a 3-year settlement for something which we don't really know the figures for until Christmas.
Yeah, we commencing 15th of December. They'll let us know.
Yeah, there was a couple of other things. Obviously, the end of UK SPF funding, is that something that you expect to hear in December about a replacement potentially for that?
I'm not aware that there's been any indication that we are getting any further funding for UK SPF. But as part of the legacy projects that members are going to be looking at, I know the Regen team who look after UK SPF are going to put forward a proposal to continue some of those schemes, but we will be funding that from base budget if we agree to go forwards with it. But I'm not aware that there's any further government funding for it.
No problem. The other one was, yeah, I was quite surprised on page 16 not to see some savings on the street cleaning side of things. I just wondered, are we still paying FCC Environmental the same amount for less work?
I mean, Chris might be able to pick up on this because I know it's in his internal audit report. I understand there's another company they've taken on to do that work. I can't remember the name of them.
Process,
Yeah. And presumably that funding will be used to pay that company.
I mean, we've only been paying for what they've been doing, if that makes any sense. But what Chris's report brings out is we don't have a penalty system in place to penalise them when they don't deliver the contract. Or not much of one, yeah.
Yeah, but that was my point though. If we're only paying them for the work they do, and there's been a lot less work happening, I was expecting to see something in the budget to show there's been some savings along that line. But you're right. I mean, obviously we'll come to Chris's report later on. But I just thought I was surprised to see there wasn't some savings in there because the new company's only come on board recently, and there's been quite a long period now of reduced service. So I just thought we would have seen some money in from that, to be honest. But that was just me.
I mean, it's an interesting point as to whether it's just getting swallowed up in the rest of the contract, because street cleaning is sort of a comparatively small bit of the contract. Any other questions from anybody? I mean, I have to say, I'm surprised to see the revenue support grant re-emerge. And presumably, you would think that we would be able to work out what they've rolled into it, because there must be stuff. But I'm puzzled. I have to say, I'm puzzled by that. That is a surprise. I mean, helpful, I suppose, because, I mean, I was sort of thinking of nil, if you see what I mean. And, you know, the government has a tendency to like specific grants and then sort of match fund if you want to take up the grant. So I'm expecting a raft of other announcements yet to come, possibly post the budget. The bit I did want to just question was, if you abolish the pool, I seem to remember there was a considerable risk reserve at one juncture, which presumably you could redistribute, which you would distribute because the pool would no longer exist.
I don't know that we have that anymore, but we can certainly check with the County Council.
Yeah,
There might have been one originally, but
I'm absolutely sure that there was a risk reserve set up when the pool was set up, because there was a concern that it wouldn't be able to roll. I mean, I'm trying to think of an example. If Kinetic had closed down entirely in Malvern and moved to Farnborough, you know, it would have been a tremendous shock to the pool. So that to ensure that it never had a negative position, there was a risk reserve set up, and I think it was £4 million. But it was quite a bit of money,
Worth plundering if it's there.
which we would be entitled to a slice of. But it could have been that as the pool matured, they ran the risk reserve down, but I'm pretty sure there was. It's an interesting question, I take it, as to whether it's worth setting up another pool. Is that where the debate is?
no, we've considered that, and while there's no business rates growth, there's absolutely no benefit to setting up a pool at all. And we're aware of only one authority that has put forward the intention to do that, but depending on what the settlement looks like, they might decide to come out of it anyway.
So do I then read into that the business rates growth income will be directed towards the mayors? Who knows? Okay. Because I've been puzzled as to how the mayors are going to get funded. But if they're in charge of strategic economic growth, it would seem to make sense to me that they had a way into the business rates that they generated. But who knows? As you rightly say, who knows? And the other question I just wanted to sort of probe a bit, and I know it isn't a recommendation, you know, that we're meant to be looking at fees and charges in the base budget, but the capital programme is what I quite wanted just to us to have a quick think about, because obviously our external audit report makes reference to, I mean, I wouldn't quite call it a mad march spend in capital, or possibly, I suppose, in revenue before you go unitary. Because I had a look through some of the figures, and I had a feeling that there were possibly projects that might come into that. I could see a lot of swing or change, but I also wondered how much slippage there was in the capital programme in this year, because that, you know, sort of makes quite an effect, I suspect, on our revenue, on our income, yeah, on our reserve.
That there's always a fair amount of slippage each year. There may well be less this year, given that some of the big projects, like what's happening in Droitwich, are pushing ahead, and they are the major part of our capital programme at the moment. But certainly there's a meeting coming up to discuss legacy projects and those large capital schemes that may be added to the capital programme if members agree.
Right. Because, I mean, I'm worried that we're going to over-program the capital programme, if you see what I mean, which in effect is the caution that the external auditors are putting in their report, but we will get to that, I suppose, later on. Any comments on fees and charges? There never seem to be. I mean, I did think go on.
Essentially, it's a WRS who've done 90% of them, and they've just whacked a 3% up. So, it's difficult to make any further comment on them. They're just fairly straightforward.
I did have two. I mean, I still maintain it's cheaper for me to throw my dog out of the street as I go out on the street when I go on holiday than it is to put it in kennels at 24 quid a night. But, so, I often slightly wondered, well, presumably we do more kenneling perhaps than other people. And I was astounded by the biodiversity net gain charges, to be honest. I understand why I have an elector who has put in a horse menage which somehow seemed to get into biodiversity net gain of the smallest possible size, and was pretty astounded that we wanted nearly £5,000 to put it as part of the biodiversity net gain. But there we go. I mean, I did think they were pretty eye-watering, to be honest. But the other thing I do worry about slightly, of course, is planning fee income, because I'm pretty confident that we're going to see a downturn in house building. And what I'm not bright enough to work out from these papers is how reliant the planning service is, our planning department, is on their fee income. And so I just warn a bit of caution there, because I'm pretty convinced that applications are slowing actually. And when we get when the SWDP revision is in place, then I think they will slow possibly even further, because at the moment what we're having is a lot of speculative applications in effect, which are outside the normal plan. So that was my sort of comment, really. People might say I'm entirely wrong, but I look at house building London, and I mean, if you look at house building figures last year, I mean, they are dropping off a cliff. Not to that degree here and in Worcestershire, but I suspect we'll follow the trend in due course. And the fee income to the planning department is considerable. So, and that then made me wonder how resilient our council tax buoyancy figures are, because for years we've always, presumed on sort of 2% of council tax buoyancy, and we've delivered in excess of that in some years, and so it's not an unreasonable assumption. But I did wonder that, like all things, you look to the future and you can always see lots of bears hiding in the woods or problems to come, and how many of them actually turn out to be true is a problem. And do we get another look at this or not? I don't think we do we? That's the next audit committee. Our next meeting is 30th of Feb. So we will have a chance to comment on the final budget before it goes to council, which was the following Wednesday. It's a bit late in the cycle, but there we go. So that's a lot of negativity for me when things are, things are under control, in my view. Any other comments from members of the panel? If not, we will we've considered and commented on, so duly noted. Thank you very much, Alice. And we'll move on to the Treasury Management mid-year update, 51 to 58 for those who are following.
Thank you, Chair. This is the interim report to the end of September against the strategy that you set in February. We've had we're still carrying large balances. It rarely goes below 100 million each day. Rates have not dropped as quickly as we expected. So our 3.9 million budget that we expected to get in investment income is now looking like 5.4, so that's an extra 1.5 million supporting our budgets. But on top of that, you know, we George and Josh and Steve Smith do look ahead, and they do lock in some good rates, which we're able to do because we've got the cash to be able to do that. So you know, we have got some good long-term rates that we're earning money on at the moment. The other part of this report is the benchmarks that we set ourselves, and they're all being met. So it's a good position that we're in at the moment. Thank you, Chair.
Any comments or Liz?
I always look at the list of where we're doing the medium to long-term lending, and each time there seems to be more councils on it. And I was noticing that this time it appears that we have 13 council loans adding up to 71 million, of which 9 million is Worcestershire, and the other investments are, for that period, are 29 million. It does seem to me rather disproportionate when we know how broke most councils are anyhow.
There's little risk. In fact, I would say there's almost no risk to us lending. Sorry, there's little risk, almost no risk to us lending to local authorities. A local authority can't go bankrupt. They will be supported by the government. We've never had a loan that didn't come back in. So we're very comfortable lending to local authorities. We don't lend exclusively to local authorities. We do try and spread the risk. Yeah,
The same question came up in budget scrutiny the other day, and basically all of those county council loans are underwritten by government. They can't afford to not honour them, so they're a high interest, low risk loan. So they're a good choice.
Yeah, I just wanted to ask a question in the table at 311. The public works loans for borrowing rates, I mean, you put that in for information, really, because I was slightly surprised that I take it, I don't know when Rachel Reeves removed the 1%, there used to be a premium. They were charging a premium of 1%, and they must have removed that in 24, I presume. But, or is it still there? I take it it's still there because of the narrow. No, I couldn't quite work out whether 2% over the 3-month deposit rate was a function of expected bank rate, which is pretty well consistent. But that's me just being academic, I suppose.
I suppose it was just a question somebody had a little while ago about the fact that we obviously got money with Worcestershire County Council now, obviously we're moving to unitary councils now. Looking at the dates, probably going to mature before it becomes an issue. But obviously there's other councils which I'm not sure on this list exactly which ones are happening earlier. And then how do we approach it with councils that want money, but they are moving to unitary, and how that might be split up? And there's going to be sort of questions around how those sort of finances are going to be handled, really.
In effect, that's a question of who would pay us back. Yeah. I mean, the answer to that question is, you know, the debt. If we had created 2 unitaries in Worcestershire, there would be an apportionment of the debt. I have to say I have no idea how that's done, but probably on a per head or, I don't know, basis. So I don't think that's that difficult. I mean, all these things are quite tricky, I suppose.
Yeah, but it's like if it was going to affect us in Worcestershire and we went to a 2 unitary solution, then part of it is owed to ourselves. So would that just be sort of written off? But it's, I think, looking at the maturity dates, the last one is end of 2027, and the new unitary, I believe, will be functioning from the beginning of 2028. So it doesn't really impact Worcestershire at the moment. But I just wondered if there was other councils going into unitary earlier, that's where this could be a potential issue. Or we just need to find out from them who's going to pay us when things move around.
Yeah, I don't know the answer to that. We're going to have to wait for all the information that comes out from government when LGR is announced. We'll be unlikely to lend again to Worcestershire County Council, which led into the period of LGR. I don't think that would be a sensible thing for us to do. But other councils, we would have to, because otherwise we would have to stop doing any business over the next 2 years if we did that.
The only one that won't apply would be Basildon, because Essex is going to be reorganised. But I couldn't see any others. I mean, there are mainly other counties. Of South Ayrshire as a unitary anyway. So that would be the only one, and Derbyshire would be on the same timescale as ourselves. And Bedford Borough Council is already a unitary. So I don't think it really arises, Neil, to be honest.
It might just be future investments as well.
Yeah.
I'll leave it with you. It was just a curious one.
Thank you, Chair. So this is the usual internal audit progress report, covered at pages 59 to 112 on your agenda packs. So I'll cover the headline areas first and foremost. So good progress is still being made. The service is fully staffed. We're still running ahead of schedule for 2025-26. By early November, 180 days had been delivered against a full year plan of 252. 6 audits are fully complete. 3 of those since the last meeting in September, and they are the street cleansing, performance management follow-up, CCTV and private sector housing. We've also got 2 audits at draft report stage, 4 in progress, 2 at the planning stage, and there are only 3 audits that are left yet to start. A summary of the progress and the results of the completed work can be found at pages 69 to 74. Productivity is still running slightly ahead of this year's increased target at 86%. Overall, the plan's on track, and I expect to deliver the annual internal audit opinion on time. In terms of implementing recommendations, there are 18 outstanding. That's 2 less than in September, and remains a significant reduction on 37 at the 24-25 year end. There is one medium priority action that's been overdue by more than a month, but having said that, the Council's well on track to exceed the target of 75% implementation on time by the end of this year, and there are no findings overall from our work which would impact significantly on the Council's annual governance statement for 2025-26. No changes to the plan are being proposed, but there are a couple of audit reports which are included in full in the appendices, so I'll just say a little bit about each of those. So firstly, the street cleansing performance management follow-up. So members will remember there were some concerns raised at the meeting in September, and so we brought this work forward, and the report's at Appendix 2. It's important to stress that this is about how the council manages performance of the contractor, and it's not an indication that we think the contractor itself is performing well. The original report made 3 medium and 1 low priority recommendations, and since the report was finalised in June, 3 of the actions have been assessed as implemented. So there's additional performance monitoring activity that's been implemented with where the contractor subcontracts to another service provider. And in relation to complaints management, the process has been strengthened. So rather than the contractor providing the list of complaints for discussion at monthly meetings, council management is now doing that. So that removes any risk of potential manipulation by the contractor. The evidence shows a focus on outcomes and application of penalty points where applicable. Having said that, the financial penalties themselves are rather small. But the evidence also shows that complaints themselves are being dealt with by management in a timely and satisfactory manner, and the service business continuity plan has also been updated. There is one outstanding action, and that relates to agreeing updated KPIs. Agreement on that hasn't yet been reached with the contractor. I would advise the council to think about what good performance really looks like for street cleansing. And I say that because the 2024-25 service plan sets the target for street cleansing satisfaction at 76%, and for the proportion of people saying that litter is a problem in the district at 39%. So that's saying that in effect that you're satisfied if nearly 4 in 10 people say that litter is a problem in the district. And I think the reality is that actually that isn't the case. You would want that, in my view, and from what I've heard and seen, you'd want that figure to be significantly lower than 4 in 10 people. But given the actual performance stats themselves aren't too far removed from this and the nature of the debate, as I say, it seems that public and members are looking for a higher baseline level of performance. Conscious that we're in public session, but we're aware that there are ongoing discussions around the future of the contract and the option of subcontracting through the executive board. So I'm not proposing to say much more about this, but obviously I'll answer questions as best I can. Moving on to the private housing audit, again, that full report is there at Appendix 3 because only limited assurance was provided. The audit was about the processes and the compliance surrounding the licensing of houses in multiple occupancy, the licensing of those, and the property standards enforcement. And we only provided limited assurance because there were a significant number of process and record keeping issues. It is important to note that when we did the audit, there was only one officer at the time responsible for licensing of HMOs across both Wychavon and Malvern, and was also responsible for assisting in property standards work, which is a lot of work for one officer. There was a member of staff on long-term sickness during the period that was covered by our sample testing, so that may have skewed our findings. But the main actions arising were around documenting procedures and improving the quality of case management notes, updating records to reflect where action has been taken, expired gas safety certificates or certificate expiry dates not being recorded on the system, risk assessments not being received prior to licences being issued, renewal licences not being issued before the expiry of existing licences, and weaknesses in the enforcement regime, including no real proactive work to identify potential unlicensed HMOs and action to improve performance management arrangements. So there is quite a bit in there. Management agreed all the actions, and as is normal with an audit that results in limited assurance, we'll do a full detailed follow-up audit next year. But members have just asked to note the report today, as there's nothing to formally approve, and I'm happy to take questions. Thank you.
So, I mean, I'm sure there are going to be some questions on this. I mean, thanks for your report, Chris. I mean, because it strikes me that internal audit has caught up, you know, spectacularly well, actually. That you've only now got 3 that you haven't yet started. And presumably those will start and then carry on into next year. Because, although I suppose one of the data one, I suspect, might be a relatively short piece of work. Yeah.
We're aiming to finish all of your work by the end of March. The reality is, there's always some hangover, but your audit plan delivery is in the best place across the patch, and I think we spoke about this last time. Generally speaking, an internal audit review from end to end takes about 3 months, which sounds a long time, but the reality is we don't do what external audit might do, which is to come in for a fixed predetermined block of time. We don't seek to interfere with officers' day jobs. So that means that audits themselves do take a bit longer. But that also includes your planning and design of work programme, the field work itself, writing all of that up, and then the important stage of drafting a report and discussing and agreeing that with management, which can be quite complex, particularly where you've got different officers from different departments involved. But the plan will be that all of those remaining assignments get started by early on in the new year to give us a chance to get them completed by the end of March and minimise any carry forward into April.
Thanks for the clarity. I'm going to move on to the 2 reports that were specific. Oh, sorry. You want to come in?
I've got one question, and that is the county councillor responsible for the maintenance of highways, and with the district council having responsibility in terms of street cleaning. So how are they differentiated? For example, if the gutters at the side of roads, or actually on the road, are becoming filled with debris, leaves and things of that nature, are you aware as to where responsibility would lie for that, and obviously the implication in terms of funding?
I think Liz can answer it.
I'm just talking about personal experience. My understanding is that if it's in the guttering, that's the responsibility of Wychavon's. If it's growing out of the flat part of the pavement, then it's the responsibility of the county council, which is strange to understand, but it's the way it works. With regard to the report, I must say I found it very clear and interesting to read. It seemed to be quite refreshingly more pointed than the stuff I've read before. And it's probably not relevant to the report, but I'm not aware that parishes are getting the service that they thought they had been told they were entitled to, which I think at one stage was 4 clean-ups a year and that sort of stuff. I'm not terribly clear what they're really entitled to and what we were told they were entitled to, and then what we were told at a council meeting they were entitled to. So I think there is a grey area as to what cleansing service parishes and villages are entitled to, apart from the fact that they only do it where there is a curb. We're not talking about the other one yet, are we?
No, I was going to do with street cleaning first, and we got to make
Yeah. And so on that, you mentioned there were some issues in terms of the performance of the contract for street cleansing. So have there been issues in respect of the cleaning of guttering and things alongside of roads? Is there any remedies available to parish councils in respect of that? As this contract is under review, is there anything to motivate the current contract holder to deal with that? Or is it something that would have to wait until there was a new contract in place?
I think Oh, there we go. I think it's incredibly complex, to be completely honest. In terms of you mentioned guttering, I think that comes through in various feedback and complaints and so on. But the reality is, the way that the current contract is set up, and there's calculation of penalty points, but when a certain number of points is accrued, the financial penalty is £1,000. But that's obviously that can accrue over a period of time, but the contract is something like 1.4 million a year specifically for the street cleansing, and then the same contractor also provides the council's residential waste service. So it's a complex area to unpick, and I'm probably not the best qualified person to actually try and unpick that. In terms of the parishes, if the contract's between this council and the contractor, so I'm not sure where the parishes would come into that.
Yes, it's just that you may have local parish councils who are inundated with complaints as regards clearing of guttering and things on road surfaces, and as to the way forward for them. But it appears that it's not going to be straightforward if there's an awareness that the contract is not being fulfilled as perhaps best it might.
The process for complaints are directed through Wychavon in liaison with the contractor. So I think if and I don't know that they are, but if contracts are being fed through to the parishes, then I would expect them to, if they're not currently, at least know that they should then direct residents through to the official channel.
Yeah.
The officer in charge of this is Ian Edwards, and I think it'd be a good idea if one of us at least asked him for a summary of what the current contractor's obligations are to our parishes and things, so that we know what we're talking about. I think that'd be useful. I don't know. Shall I do it?
I think that would be very helpful indeed, because certainly in the ward I represent, that is an issue.
Okay, I'll take that on board and I'll ask Ian, and I'll circulate it just by email.
I was actually, one of my points was going to be that there's obviously meant talk of the business continuity plan by Head of Client Services, and I wondered actually it would be good to get them here to, not interrogate them, but to sort of be able to ask them, for them to present that to us so we can understand that business continuity plan more, and then be able to question them on, beyond that, on what we can expect from cleaning services, etc. Because obviously there is a requirement for development of KPIs, and I think we would be great if we could question them on that, because I've got a number of questions on the KPIs and how that might be implemented. So I just wondered if that would be something we could do for the next meeting.
Well, the bit I always get slightly nervous about is moving into overview and scrutiny's role rather than audit.
If I could just jump in again, just because I think where my thinking's coming from is that as Chris said, there's no audit of FCC performance. All Chris has done is look at the engagement of management with FCC, which is, I understand, it's fine, and what he's done is great, and obviously brought up an issue. But as an audit committee, we have no ability at the moment to actually understand the auditing of FCC, and therefore effectively scrutinise it as the audit committee. And then it sort of goes back to, well, what are these KPIs, what are they going to look like? Because we obviously want to be able to audit the KPIs, so we want to know what those KPIs are going to be. Now, Chris mentioned about the performance levels being sort of satisfaction levels of the public, etc. But I think there's other questions about, you know, if we put in a request one day, how long would that be dealt with? Now, I can give you 2 examples where I've gone out and cleaned them myself, where I put in April and May, I chased up in June, July, ended up doing them in September myself because I was fed up of waiting. So I just think there's a lot more work here, and it would be good to have Chris and his team supporting us in terms of what those KPIs might look like as well, so we can, as an audit, for them to be able to audit FCC's performance and for us to be able to scrutinise that performance.
So I'm just going to echo what the chair said, because we do need, I think, need to make the distinction between what audit committee is here for and what overview and scrutiny is there for. And it's quite a common thing where there's sort of one gets close to the other. We're here, and my role and our internal audit role is to provide assurance and yes, consultancy and advice. I would suggest that some of the, you know, the nature, they're all great, perfectly, really good, valid questions, but they're probably more for an overview and scrutiny environment and function, and for it to happen there. But where we would come in is once a new set of KPIs and structure has been agreed, and if it's a new contract, whatever it might be, now we could either look at that in advance and provide comment in a, you know, a consultancy advisory capacity, and then once it's in place, we can do internal audit work and provide assurance and report back through this committee. That's the way I would suggest that you move forward.
Okay. Right. I know I always stray too far into actual delivery, but I do find it dancing on the top of a needle, really, because audit can be clear that the service that was to be given to the villages hasn't happened, and it probably isn't. Well, it hasn't happened. It still isn't happening in my personal view, but I may be different to the rest of the county. And the report that you gave us, which I thought was very helpful, was making reference to discussions with the contractors, and it included about taking account of national living wage changes, I think. Well, I mean, we all know that the reason why there's a problem in the first place is because Foxa were saying they couldn't provide the labour, and they couldn't provide the labour because they were borrowing the staff from the cleansing service to prop up the waste collection service. Presumably part of it was difficulty recruiting, but it was probably what they were paying them. You know, it all ties up together, and the result is we've not got what we want, and scrutiny may or may not bother to get round to it, and we've got it on our table and would like to see it improved.
Which very eloquently backs up my position, I'm afraid, that I don't think this is a role for audit. As you know, my favourite definition of auditors is they arrive on the battlefield once the battle is over and stab the wounded to death. So,
back.
but I'm afraid to say that to get the KPIs developed and things like that, the pressure has to either go to the cabinet member or to overview and scrutiny and say, let's do a task and finish group. I'm sure we're three such prominent members, and there is a cross-party feel on this. And the result of that is that they have employed the secondary contractor that Chris has looked into. And so, you know, I think this is what I would call a brave try. But
Accepting what you say, can we therefore from this committee send a message both to the board member and to scrutiny that there is a clear problem here that we would expect them to be working on?
I'd agree with that.
That'd be very
I want to
helpful
leave it in
indeed.
fresh air.
Chair, can I just add that looking back through overviewing scrutiny's agendas, I could see, I had to look earlier today, this was the street cleansing performance and the contract was considered in November 2024, so there is a precedent.
yeah, no, I mean, it needs to be followed up by overview and scrutiny, I think, to see what the outcome of the secondary contractor is. I mean, my instinct on this, for what it's worth, complain to Tim Lewis. Try again. I also think there's a differential, actually, between the towns and the villages. I think the secondary contractors, there was an emphasis, I think, more on the towns than the contract. But I'd just like you to remind us, Chris, of the residents' satisfaction survey figures and the disparity that you highlighted, because I would agree with what you said, 79%.
39%.
That's the target.
We have a target of 79%.
Yeah, and I can't remember the actuals, but they weren't a country mile away. Yeah, so your target for 24-25 was to have a customer satisfaction level with the street cleansing service of 76%, which implies 24%. If 24% are unhappy, then that's something you tolerate. And proportion of people saying that litter is a problem, 39%. So that's the implication of that is that if 39% of people say that litter is a problem in Wychavon, then that's kind of okay because that's in line with the target.
So can I ask,
The differential is 14%. 14 and 100.
who sets these targets? It's not relevant to us really as a committee, but who does set these targets?
Well, really, it's management in association. I would think here it's the exec board. Yeah. And that's why it is actually a really important area, just generally. Performance management is a key component for any organisation that, you know, has high aspirations. What does good performance look like? And that's a question for, you know, you could ask across all of the council services. And I'm not saying that, generally speaking, the performance management system isn't fit for purpose, so we've got an audit on that coming up anyway. But it is important as members, when you look at when this comes before you, to consider, well, actually, are we happy with these targets? Does that really tell us that that's good performance? And indeed, do they show that your actually are they relevant to the objectives? Should you be measuring something else?
The resident survey is presumably from the general resident survey. Whether particular aspects of the service are being performed satisfactorily are not necessarily in the minds of an awful lot of people who are filling in that resident survey. So it may be one of those cases where you set a target on what you can measure, but I don't think you can actually measure what we're talking about unless you were doing that survey with parish councils.
Yeah, but I mean, at the parish council conference, you would get sort of feedback on this sort of thing. I mean, at this time of year, because of the late leaf fall and that sort of thing, you know, gutters always are a problem. But I was interested at Trencham, but that's a slightly different parish, really, just by the amount of litter that is blowing off the motorway service station, which is a real problem. And again, nobody seems to be tidying that up. Always remember the parish links in the council, aren't they? You should be able to deal with that sort of problem. So I'm going to move on to houses of multiple occupation, which is an interesting thing because 20 years ago I would have said we didn't have any. So I'm not surprised that we've only got 2 members of staff, but probably we have more than I thought.
Well, I did say, I said a bit in my intro, so over to questions, really.
I've not really got any questions, but just obviously it's a good report and you've picked up on huge issues here, and it's good to hear the management have decided to adopt everything in full. And hopefully, I mean, when do you think, I suppose the question would be, you said next year, when in next year? Because it does seem to be something that almost feels like it needs to be prioritised to follow up as soon as possible.
Thank you for the feedback. I'll share that with the auditor. That's really appreciated. I'm just having a quick look as we speak at the action plan to see what the dates are in there. So we have got some, we've got March 26, okay. There's a theme of the end of March 2026 here, although there is a 2026-27 project. So I would say that the first quarter of 2026-27, so we'd be talking April to June, would be when we'd at least be able to start the conversation with a view to getting that piece of work running.
That sounds good. Thank you, Chris.
Yeah, I mean, I would have thought the recommendations would be in the first 3 months of the new financial year from implementation, would seem reasonable to me. I mean, November, they have the report, I mean, that gives them 6 months, which is, you know, quite a long time, I would have thought. So if we can just note and thank Chris very much indeed, as always, for your work. And, you know, I think it's going well this year, so thank you very much. I'm sorry to hear it isn't going so well elsewhere, but there we go. Judging by what you said. Yeah. The delays are slightly more. Yeah. So we move on to item 7. Now, I don't know if you're happy on the right wing over there or whether you want to come more into the middle of the room.
I suppose it's whatever suits the committee. I'm quite happy sitting here.
Well,
but
stay where you are then. Thank you very much. If I could ask you to report to your annual report for 24-25.
yeah, thank you, Chair. I suppose by way of introduction and to put into context why you're receiving a draft auditor's annual report now, which is different to last year where we presented both our audit completion report and auditor's annual report at the end of the audit, is that we have a requirement to carry out our audit in line with a code of audit practice. And that code of audit practice introduced the requirement from 24-25 onwards for us to present to those charged with governance our auditor's annual report by the end of November every year. So that will be the arrangement going forward as long as that code of audit practice stands. It does take note, however, that the audit of the financial statements, the statement of accounts, could still, however, be ongoing at this moment in time. But it still requires us to present a report to you. So the report you have in front of you today is draft. It is draft because we are still carrying out the audit of the financial statements, and we will be coming back to committee on the audit of the financial statements in line with the backstop date of the end of February 2026. The report, therefore, does not comment on or bring out any recommendations or any findings in relation to the statement of account, the audit of the statement of accounts. What it does do, however, is present to you our findings in respect of our value for money work that we have done to date. I would caveat it at this stage. The other reason why it is draft is if anything does come out through our audit of the financial statements, or any more up-to-date information in terms of value for money comes through before we conclude on the 24-25 accounts, we will come back to the committee with an updated auditor's annual report at that time as well. So, as I noted, this report focuses on the value for money work that we have done, and that is looking at the council's arrangements for securing its value for money arrangements around about economy, efficiency and effectiveness of its arrangements to around about how it's using its resources. We focus on three specific areas: financial sustainability, governance, and use of resources, value for money aspect. What we aim to do is identify whether or not there are, or not aim to do, but we are looking to identify if there are any significant weaknesses in those arrangements. And if they are, we would be raising what we call a key recommendation or potentially a statutory recommendation. I'm pleased to report, based on the work that we have done to date, that we have not identified any significant weaknesses in the council's arrangements, and therefore are not presenting to you any key recommendations or statutory recommendations. We do, however, include within our report two other recommendations, and they are more aligned to areas which the council may wish to consider. They are there for potential improvement in the arrangements that the council currently has. Our report also is set in the context of where the council is, where a lot of councils are in terms of local government reorganisation, and the recommendations that we have presented to you in our report are focused on that contextual information around about local government reorganisation, and they are there to further support and enhance members in carrying out their scrutiny function going forward. In terms of the three areas that we've concentrated on, we have put a summary statement included within the report on those arrangements, and as I say, it has resulted in us not identifying any significant weaknesses in those arrangements. That was really all I wanted to say on the report, but I am obviously happy to take any questions and talk about the detail of the report.
Thank you very much. Does anybody have any questions on the auditor's report so far? I'm slightly unsure as to where this goes next, Alice. But no, normally I would expect it to go on to full council, wouldn't I? But we'll wait for the final report, I take it.
So we have determined those charged with governance to be this committee, so the audit committee. So it would be up to the council if they decided for it to go to any other committee or full council. But we've concluded that the audit committee is deemed to be those charged with governance.
So that I couldn't highlight it in my report to council just before Christmas in December. Okay, that's clear. Generally, I mean, obviously it's a good report. Very encouraging. I mean, you obviously highlight the question of financial sustainability in the medium-term financial plan looking forward, and I think we're pretty aware of that. And, you know, you also highlight, you know, the peer challenge review. But just moving on to the two recommendations, which I think we ought to try and pick up. Local government financial reorganisation in the timescale that the government wants it to happen in, if it does happen, is going to be a considerable challenge, I think, for all of us. And so you very sensibly put in that we want to, you know, develop financial reporting to members to include consideration of the impact. And to a degree, we're sort of starting to do that. You know, the money plan does reflect that. I don't know whether Alice has got any further sort of, I mean, at the moment, because it's so cloudy, it's very hard to know where to go with this. And so you put an implementation date in March 2026, which would seem to make sense to me, because hopefully we would know. And we want to, you know, the other recommendations you put in is look at our governance arrangements. I mean, we already have a lead member for local government reform in the portfolio holder. And we have a strong overview and scrutiny board who will look at the local government proposal, because of course the two are very different. And it, you know, the one Worcestershire model, and is the county council going to be a continuing authority, is an interesting question. So, I mean, I think we will pick that up again in March 2026. But unless anybody else has any comments, I think, you know, I'm quite happy with that sort of approach. I don't think we as an audit committee need to do anything or make recommendations to council to move faster, unless anybody else agrees.
I think the March 26 date that Jane has put in refers to the conclusion of the budget for 26-27. So any legacy projects that members deem appropriate would be put into the budget at that stage.
So what you're inferring is that you would probably expect to see a resources line in there. Or...
Well, it's any projects that members want to take forwards, which to the most part will be funded through our reserves.
Ignorant question again. We're told that they're unable to form an opinion on 24/5, and therefore intend to disclaim our audit report. And we're told that the audit of 24/5 is still ongoing and not yet finished. I'm completely confused. Are we saying there is, because of the failures of our previous auditor, we're never going to get a complete clean sheet? And when do we expect to have a finished audit that can be accepted, I mean?
You want to limit
After we've finished. After Wychavon's closed.
I will keep it quite high level because it is a very complicated process that we are now having to go through. But we are actually starting to what we call build back the assurance from the previous years where you have been receiving a disclaimed opinion, and we need to build back that assurance to allow us to then move forward to hopefully in the future be back to providing unqualified opinions that are not impacted by the disclaimed work. The earliest we could achieve that, as we've reported previously, would be 27-28. The reason for that is we require 3 balance sheets to allow us to do that. And so that would be 25-26, 26-27 and 27-28. So that would be the earliest that we could get that to do, and we are working with the council, with management, in order to build back those assurances that we need to hopefully arrive at that position.
Given that we're in this position because of the failure of the previous auditors, and however comfortable we are feeling about our own accounts publicly, they presumably can be questioned. Don't we have some claim against the failure of performance of the previous auditors, who I think still wanted to get paid for it, didn't they?
They did indeed, and I don't know whether we did pay them. I rather suspect we didn't.
Yes, we have.
We did pay them just to tidy it up, but I mean, of course, the fault occurs in the 23-24, where Ernst & Young basically did no work at all, and then just washed their hands of it and walked away.
Very unsatisfactory end.
I mean, it is a very unsatisfactory end. I mean, whether this audit committee will be one of the last meetings where we approve the accounts before we disappear off into the sunset, I rather hope so, strangely.
Might be nice.
Might be nice, you know, to hand over a tidy sheet with a chip with a clean set of accounts would be a reasonable achievement, I think. I don't know whether you've got anything else you want to highlight. Yeah.
It does come with challenges, and we will be reporting every single year. One of the challenges for 27-28 is that we don't complete our audit as at the 31st of March. So there is that challenge, and the backstop dates do move forward. So the backstop date for 27-28 is November. So we are hopefully moving back to I'm going to say normal reporting timescales, but that period, potentially period between the 1st of April 2028 and November 2028, where we're carrying out the audit of the 27-28 accounts, this council potentially will not exist. And there is that challenge around about how we deliver our audit and what capacity there is in terms of council to support us in delivering that audit.
I've probably got a bit of an ignorant question here, but obviously the new unitary starts beginning of April 2028. but the elections are obviously 2027.
No, yes, but also 29.
But what's happening with district councillors in the interim year in order to sort of finish things off? Are we
Keeping
kept on, or do we get voted back in again, or has this already been discussed and I've just somehow let it's gone over my head?
What I understand, of course, is you create a shadow authority, and that then runs for a year before taking over full control, at which stage, April 2028, if you don't stand for re-election, it is indeed goodbye.
So the existing councillors serve an extra 11 months to April, and then the new council, they're all, well, whoever got elected in 97 would take over in 98 April, is that right?
Yeah, 27, 28, yeah.
And the people who were previously elected before 97 are expected to suffer another 11 months.
They state you get another 11 months without fighting with the electorate. But from having never been in a reorganisation, this is only hearsay, of course. The second the shadow authority is created, you can sense the power leaching away from you, I gather. Yeah, Mrs. Hardman, let me assure you, is delighted with the idea of another 11 months. But anyway, there we go. I think that's us duly done. So if we can note the report, and I will bring it out in my report to the Council in December. Move on to the last. Thank you very much indeed for coming in person. I'm sorry we didn't have more challenging questions, but in a way it's a good thing that we don't have more challenging questions, I suppose. If we can just note the dates of future meeting, the 13th of Feb and the 27th of March. Thank you very much indeed for attending.